Good afternoon, Madam President.
The senator from California.
Thank you very much. I ask unanimous consent to speak for 25 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise to speak on the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian regime and the decision that is before the United States Senate on how to respond to such inhumanity. I also come to the floor with the hope that the use of military force will not prove necessary and that the proposal to place Syria's chemical weapons program under United Nations control will, in fact, be successful. Last night, in my view, the President delivered a strong, straightforward speech that directly outlined the current situation in Syria. He asked that a vote by the Congress to authorize military force against the Assad regime be delayed so that a strategy could be developed with Russia and the United Nations Security Council that would eliminate Syria's deadly chemical weapons program. I believe this is the appropriate path forward, and I appreciate very much the majority leaders holding off on bringing this resolution for a vote so that negotiations can continue. Here in the Senate, there are discussions going on about how to amend the resolution passed by the Foreign Relations Committee to provide time for diplomacy. Perhaps that won't be necessary. I'd also like to take a minute to give Russia credit for bringing forward this plan for a negotiated solution to the conflict. I disagree with the senator from Texas. As the Russian ambassador described to me on Monday of this week, Russia is sincere, wants to see a United Nations resolution, and supports the Geneva II process, which would accompany a negotiated settlement to Syria's civil war. Based on my conversation with Ambassador Kislyak, I believe that Russia's goal is, in fact, to eliminate these weapons, and I would point out that that is also our goal. So I very much hope that the path to settlement, although complicated, no doubt, but if well-intentioned by all participants, it can be accomplished, and I deeply believe that. And if the United Nations Security Council can agree on a resolution to put this proposal into practice, it would put the world's imprimatur on an important plan to safeguard and then to destroy Syria's chemical weapons program, the first time in history that anything like this would have been done. Russia's responsibility to get this done is enormous, and to move with all deliberate speed. I think Russia and Syria must understand that the way to forestall a United States strike on Syria is for there to be a good faith agreement and process underway to put all of Syria's chemical weapons, including munitions, delivery systems, and chemicals themselves, under international control for eventual demolition. Syria's chemical weapons program is maintained and stored across Syria in more than 36 sites. There are indications that Syria currently has chemical weapons loaded and ready for immediate use in bombs, artillery and rockets, and already loaded on planes and helicopters. All of it needs to be inventoried, collected, and then destroyed as soon as possible if the effort is to succeed. This will be a large and complicated process, and the agreement may take some time to put in place. But if it can be done, we should take the time to get it done. At the same time, we can't allow there to be so much delay and hesitation as has characterized some arms control efforts in the past. It is clear to me that the United States is moving quickly already. Tomorrow, Secretary Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will meet in Geneva to discuss the specifics of how to move forward. I cannot stress enough the importance of this process. Not only is it a possible solution to the specter of future use of chemical weapons by the Syrian regime and a way to ensure that extremist elements of the opposition do not gain control of these weapons, but it also sets an important precedent for the United Nations to act to resolve conflict before there is large military confrontation. But it should be clear by now that the Assad regime has repeatedly used chemical weapons. So I would like to speak as chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and lay out some of the unclassified intelligence that shows the regime was indeed behind this largest use of chemical weapons in more than 2 decades. The unclassified assessment is based on classified intelligence we have seen on the Intelligence Committee. So here's the case. The intelligence community assesses today with high confidence that the Syrian regime used chemical weapons, specifically sarin, in the Damascus suburbs in the early morning of August 21. This assessment is supported by all 16 of our intelligence agencies, as well as other countries, including the United Kingdom and France. The Obama administration has publicly laid out its case at an unclassified level, and I have carefully reviewed the classified information that supports those findings. First, there is intelligence indicating that the Assad regime, specifically its military and the Syrian Scientific Studies and Research Center, which manages its chemical weapons program, has used chemical weapons roughly a dozen times over the past year. On June 13th, 2 months before this latest attack, the administration stated that it had completed a review of all available intelligence and had concluded that the intelligence community had high confidence that the Assad regime used chemical weapons, including the nerve agent sarin, on a small scale against the opposition multiple times. This followed similar assessments by France, the United Kingdom, Israel, and Turkey earlier this year. In some of these cases, the regime may have been testing its delivery vehicles or various amounts of chemical agents. Some were small-scale, tactical uses against the opposition. Perhaps Assad was just trying to find out how the world would react to his use of chemical weapons. But it has been more than a year since top intelligence officials learned of Syrian preparations to use sarin in large quantities. Since then, at numerous other briefings and hearings, the Intelligence Committee has followed this issue closely. On September 11, 2012, that's a year ago, while protests against our embassy in Cairo were underway and the attack on our diplomatic facility in Benghazi was imminent, I was again briefed on the administration's plans should Assad conduct such an attack. So the attack on August 21 in Damascus was not a first-time use. Rather, it was a major escalation in the regime's willingness to employ weapons long held as anathema by almost the entire world population. Now let me lay out the intelligence case that the Assad regime used chemical weapons on August 21. Much of this is described in a 4-page, August 30th, unclassified document entitled United States Government Assessment of the Syrian Government's Use of Chemical Weapons on August 21, 2013. Madam President, I'd like to enter that document into the record, along with a map showing the 12 areas near Damascus reportedly affected by chemical weapons on August 21.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. We know that 3 days before the attack of August 21, Syrian officials involved in the preparation and use of chemical weapons and associated with the Syrian Scientific Studies and Research Center were preparing chemical munitions in the Damascus suburb of Adra. And that's according to the intelligence community. The intelligence specifically relates to an area in Adra that the regime has used for mixing chemical weapons, including sarin. The Syrian chemical weapons personnel were operating and present there from August 18 to the early morning of August 21 and finished their work shortly before the attack began. Some of the intelligence collected on the preparations for the attack is highly sensitive, so the details of the Syrian actions cannot be described publicly without jeopardizing our ability to collect this kind of intelligence in the future. But in numerous classified briefings over the past 2 weeks, members of Congress have been provided with additional detail on the names of the intelligence officials involved and the stream of human signals and geospatial intelligence that indicate that the regime was preparing to use chemical weapons. So we actually have names. It is from the specificity of this intelligence reporting that the intelligence community has drawn its high level of confidence that the regime was behind the use of chemical weapons. The strike began in the early morning hours on Wednesday, August 21. It is beyond doubt that large amounts of artillery and rockets were launched from regime-controlled territory in Damascus and rained down on the opposition-controlled areas of the Damascus suburbs. There is satellite imagery actually showing this, as well as thousands of first-hand accounts that began showing up on social media sites at around 2:30 a.m. The barrage continued for 5 days, though the use of chemical weapons appears to have been deliberately suspended by the regime after the first few hours. Since the attack, physical samples from the area have been analyzed, and the intelligence community assesses with high confidence that, and I quote, laboratory analysis of physiological samples obtained from a number of individuals revealed exposure to sarin, end quote. More than 100 videos, I think 170, were posted online showing the effects of the chemical weapons on hundreds of men, women, and most troubling, sleeping children who were dead or showing the signs of exposure to the nerve agent. At my request, the intelligence community compiled a representative sample of 13 videos which have been corroborated and verified. That's the point. These show evidence. The places have been corroborated. They could not be bogus. They are verified. This clearly shows the suffering and death caused by these weapons. The Intelligence Committee has posted these videos on our website, www.intelligence.senate.gov. I would urge Americans to look at this. They are absolutely horrendous and should shock the conscience of all humanity. The videos show the physical manifestations of a nerve agent attack: foaming mouths, pinpointed and constricted pupils, which is a signature of sarin, convulsions, gasping for breath, all happening as the nervous system begins to shut down. One video shows a lifeless toddler receiving emergency respiratory assistance. Another shows a young boy struggling to breathe, gasping while his eyes are swollen shut and covered in mucus. A third heinous video shows rows and rows of bodies lined up in an improvised morgue. Another shows a man foaming at the mouth and convulsing, both indications of sarin exposure. And it goes on and on. Last night, the President urged all Americans to watch these videos, to just see how hideous the use of these chemicals actually is. Seeing these images firsthand makes clear why chemical weapons have been banned and why Assad must be prevented from using them again. What really affected me was a video I saw of a little Syrian girl with long dark hair who was wearing pajamas. The little girl looked just like my daughter at that age. Same hair, same pajamas, same innocence, except the little Syrian girl was lifeless. She had died from exposure to sarin, a chemical that the world has essentially outlawed. For me, the videos and watching them shows the abhorrence of chemical weapons. It shows why we must do something. Fired into densely populated areas, such as cities, they have an indiscriminate effect, killing everyone in their path and causing suffering and eventual death to others nearby. And we have evidence that the chemical attack was premeditated and planned as part of the regime's heinous tactics against the rebels. Also, there is intelligence that the Syrian regime was prepared with gas masks for its people in the area, so it could clear these areas in the Damascus suburbs that were attacked in order to wrest control from the opposition. Additional intelligence collected following the attack includes communications from regime officials that confirms their knowledge that chemical weapons were used. Let me repeat that. Additional intelligence following the attack includes communications from regime officials that confirms their knowledge that chemical weapons were used. The original unclassified intelligence assessment distributed by the administration states, and I quote, "We intercepted communications involving a senior official intimately familiar with the offensive." We intercepted communications involving a senior official intimately familiar with the assessment who confirmed that chemical weapons were used by the regime on August 21 and was concerned with the UN inspectors obtaining evidence. On the afternoon of August 21, we have intelligence that Syrian chemical weapons personnel were directed to cease operations, end quote. This is direct evidence. To sum up the intelligence case, I have no doubt that the regime ordered the use of chemical weapons on August 21. I also have no doubt that the use of these weapons by the military and under the guidance of Syria's Chemical Weapons Team, Branch 450, operates under the command and control of the regime, under the ultimate leadership and responsibility of President Assad. Madam President, let me move now from the intelligence case of Syria's use of sarin on August 21 to the question before the Senate of how to respond. As I said in the beginning, it would be my strong hope that the United States and Russia can come to an agreement with other UN Security Council members on a way to resolve this situation peacefully. Not only is a peaceful solution preferred to the use of force, but if Syria's chemical weapons program, including all of its precursors, chemicals, equipment, delivery system, loaded bombs, can be put in the custody of the United Nations for its eventual destruction, that will provide a much stronger protection against future use. And it sets an important precedent for the future, for the world, to settle any other dispute of this nature. I have urged the Obama administration to take all possible steps to make this proposal work, and I appreciate the President's decision to ask us to delay any use of force resolution so that diplomacy can be given a chance. However, the Senate may still face a resolution to authorize the use of force in the event that all diplomatic options fail. And many of my colleagues have noted that the threat of force has helped push forward the diplomatic option. Is my time up? The Assad regime has clearly used chemical weapons to gas its own people. And I believe that it will most likely do so again unless it is confronted with a major condemnation by the world. And that now is beginning to happen. The regime has escalated its attacks from small-scale ones that killed 6 or 8 to 10 people with sarin to an attack that killed more than 1,000. We know that the regime has munitions that could kill tens of thousands of Syrians in Aleppo or Homs. If the world doesn't respond now, we bear the responsibility of a larger tragedy happening later. Of course, it's not only Syria who's looking at preparing and using weapons long banned by the international community. Iran is watching intently at what the world will do in Syria and will apply the lessons it learns to its current development of nuclear weapons. North Korea, which has refrained from using the nuclear weapons it has, or the chemical weapons stockpile that actually dwarfs that of Syria, may well use the Assad example to fire on South Korea. And remember, we have 28,000 plus troops right over the border of the DMZ within a half hour. And more generally, countries around the world will see the United States as a paper tiger when it promises to take action but fails to do so. Former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates, whom I have great respect for, who worked in both the Bush and Obama administrations, said exactly that when he came out in support in the resolution for use of force against Syria. Gates said this, and it's a quote, "I strongly urge the Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, to approve the President's request for authorization to use force. Whatever one's views on the current United States policy toward Syria, failure by Congress to approve the request would, in my view, have profoundly negative and dangerous consequences for the United States, not just in the Middle East, but around the world, both now and in the future." I strongly believe that the major powers in the world have a responsibility to take action. When a country not only slaughters 100,000 of its own citizens, put millions into homeless status, millions into refugee status, but especially when it's willing to use weapons against them that have been banned as an affront to all humanity because they are outlawed by a treaty joined by 189 nations representing 98% of the world's population. If the United Nations does not act in such cases, I believe it becomes irrelevant. If nothing is done to stop this use of chemical weapons, they will be used in future conflicts. I am really sure of that. American servicemen in World War I were gassed with their Allied partners. In our briefings over the past week, the military has made clear to us that if we allow the prohibition on chemical weapons use to erode, our men and women in uniform may again suffer from these weapons on the battlefield. Chemical weapons are not like conventional weapons. Consider for a moment how sarin, for example, can kill indiscriminately. The closer you are to the release which is, let's say, to a mortar or an artillery shell, the more certain you are to death. Sarin is colorless, it is odorless. It spreads over a wide geographic area. It can shift from one neighborhood to another if the wind shifts. The gas clings to the ground. You cannot escape it. During World War I, chemical weapons, primarily chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas. As a matter of fact, I live close by where mustard gas canisters were at Fort Leach, which is now American University, and were rolled down the hill into a subdivision where they have been cropping up and necessitating a major Army Corps of Engineers removal of this gas as well as other things. They were used by both sides of the war. They caused an estimated 100,000 fatalities and 1.3 million injuries. 1,462 American soldiers were killed, and 72,807 were injured by chemical weapons, which represented 1/3 of all U.S. casualties during World War I. Since World War I, not a single United States soldier has died in battle from exposure to chemical weapons. However, according to the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, since World War I, chemical weapons have caused more than 1 million casualties globally. During World War II, Nazi Germany used carbon monoxide and pesticides such as Zyklon B in gas chambers during the Holocaust, killing an estimated 3 million people that way. Madam President, I'd like to enter a document into the record that details the history and use of chemical weapons around the war since World War I.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. These past uses of chemical weapons make clear that they should never be used again, and that the entire world must stand up and take action if they are. In Syria, the use of chemical weapons on civilians, on men, women, and children, gassed to death with intention during the middle of the night while they're sleeping, is a travesty that reflects the hatred and increasing desperation of the Assad regime. I also believe that there are other chemical weapons that have been mixed and loaded into delivery vehicles with the potential to kill thousands more. Now think about it. If he can slaughter 100,000 of his own people without a second thought, what is he going to do if we do nothing? What is he going to do if the United Nations does nothing? What is he going to do if this effort to reach consensus on the Security Council doesn't work? And we don't do anything. He will use them again. They are ready to go. So the question comes that I have, why would Assad load bombs with chemical weapons and not use them? If the United States does nothing in the face of this atrocity, it sends such a signal of weakness to the rest of the world that we are, yes, a paper tiger. And that's going to be the conclusion in Iran and in North Korea. The answer is that we cannot turn our backs. This use is prohibited by international law, and it must be condemned by the world with action. Albert Einstein said in a well-known quote, "The world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it," end quote. For more than 90 years, our country has played the leading role in the world in prohibiting the atrocities of World War I and then World War II. We are the nation that others look upon to stop repressive dictators and massive violations of human rights. We cannot withdraw into our own borders and do nothing and let the slaughter continue. So, Madam President, I hope that military force will not be needed, that we will allow the time for the United Nations and the parties on the Security Council to put an agreement together, and that the threat of force will be sufficient to change President Assad's behavior. If these diplomatic efforts at the UN fail, I know we're going to be back here on the floor to consider the authorization for use of military force, but I sincerely hope that it won't be necessary. And when the ambassador from Russia described Russia's intention to me on Monday, it was sincere. So the ball is really in Russia's court. Russia is the leader in this. I trust that it is sincere. I trust that Russia and the United States will come together and bring the other parties together, and that it will be possible for the United Nations to act so the United States won't have to. I thank the Chair. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Maine.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, 12 years ago, al-Qaeda terrorists attacked our homeland, killing nearly 3,000 people. I will never forget the heroes of that day, many of whom laid down their lives for others. Their courage is epitomized by the words spoken by a fire department captain at the World Trade Center. He radioed in to say, "We're still heading up." Indeed, these firefighters were still heading up, while others were fleeing the flames and the acrid smoke. Where that kind of courage and determination comes from is hard to contemplate, but we're so grateful that our first responders have that kind of dedication and courage. Nor will I ever forget the many people who continue to live with the scars, whether they are civilians who lost a loved one that day, firefighters or police officers or other first responders who rushed to the scene, or our brave military service members who answered the call to defend our country in the years that followed. We must never lose sight of their sacrifice. Madam President, we have been considering this week the weighty issue of whether or not to grant the administration the authority to use military force against Syria. But this day, the anniversary of those horrific attacks on our country 12 years ago, should not pass without our calling attention to another important matter of unfinished business critical to our national security and to our nation's conscience. A year ago today, terrorists with links to al-Qaeda attacked our diplomatic facility in Benghazi, Libya. Despite a steadily escalating stream of threat reporting and an obvious inability of Libyan security forces to protect our diplomatic personnel and our facilities, the State Department had denied urgent requests for increased security measures. Officials kept the woefully vulnerable Benghazi compound open, setting the stage for attackers to essentially walk right into the compound and set it ablaze. Tragically, we lost 4 brave and dedicated American diplomats and security personnel that terrible day and night. Glenn Doherty, Tyrone Woods, Sean Smith, and Ambassador Chris Stevens. We laud their courage and we honor their memory, but we must also remedy the security failures and punish those responsible for their deaths. And so today, I draw attention to the lessons that must be learned from the attacks in Benghazi and to the work that still must be done to bring the attackers to justice. First, we must ensure that such wholesale failure to read the signs of escalating danger and to respond to urgent security needs does never happens again. Last year, as chairman and ranking member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, former Senator Joe Lieberman and I conducted an investigation into the terrorist attacks at Benghazi. In our bipartisan report entitled Flashing Red, we found that the State Department downplayed the terrorist threat in Benghazi despite numerous previous attacks on Western targets, that they ignored repeated requests for additional security, and that they insufficiently fortified a shamefully ill-protected American compound. The Benghazi facility should either have been closed until security was strengthened or the threat abated. We identified changes that must be made, including greater attention to security at high-risk coasts around the world, and better management to ensure that the recommendations of previous securities reviews are fully implemented. It was discouraging to read previous Accountability Review Board reports after the attacks in Africa, for example, back in the late 1990s, and their patterns of requests for security being denied in Washington. Second, Secretary of State John Kerry should hold personnel accountable for the problems identified in our committee report and by the Accountability Review Board. After our committee and the ARB identified systemic failures and leadership deficiencies that contributed to the grossly inadequate security in Benghazi, it is totally unacceptable for the State Department to hold no one responsible for the broader mismanagement that occurred prior to the attack. And finally, a year after the attack, the terrorists who invaded the Benghazi compound still have not been brought to justice despite repeated promises and pledges by President Obama to do so. After a long-delayed investigation, including a period of weeks when FBI agents were not allowed to even access the Benghazi facility, federal authorities have recently filed criminal charges against several suspects. But serious questions remain about the pace, the extent, and the effectiveness of these investigations and charges. A major problem is the willingness or lack thereof of the Libyan government to fully cooperate. I am told that the whereabouts of one of the prime suspects are known and that he is walking about fully, openly, and freely. And yet he has not been picked up, he has not been arrested, he has not been taken into captivity. Why not? The administration must follow through on its commitment by taking the steps necessary to bring the attackers to justice as the President promised. And the State Department, in the meantime, must implement all of the actions needed to prevent a Benghazi-like attack from taking place again. Surely, on the anniversary of the attacks on our nation 12 years ago and the attacks 1 year ago in Benghazi, we owe it to Chris Stevens and his colleagues and to the American people. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, seeing no one seeking recognition, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte.
Remarks on the Senate floor this afternoon about a possible military reaction to the chemical weapons attacks in Syria on August 21st. The senators continue offering general speeches today. Earlier today, they broke from remarks in the Senate chamber to join their House colleagues as they attended a Capitol Hill ceremony commemorating the 12th anniversary of the attacks on 9/11. Our companion network C-SPAN carried that live. And by the way, if you missed any of that or any of our 9/11 commemoration coverage today, including President Obama attending a moment of silence on the South Lawn at the White House, the Pentagon ceremony, and the reading of the names of the victims of 9/11 in New York City, all of that is available online at cspan.org. While the Senate remains in a quorum call, let's take a look at some of the Pentagon ceremony from earlier today.
Good morning. From Scripture, we learn of the miracle of restoration. You who have made me see many troubles and calamities will revive me again. From the depths of the earth, you will bring me up again. You will increase my greatness and comfort me again. Secretary Hagel, General Dempsey, members of our armed forces, and most of all, the survivors who bear the wounds of that day and the families of those we lost. It is an honor to be with you here again to remember the tragedy of 12 Septembers ago, to honor the greatness of all who responded, and to stand with those who still grieve, and to provide them some measure of comfort once more. Together we pause and we pray and we give humble thanks as families and as a nation for the strength and the grace that from the depths of our despair has brought us up again, has revived us again, has given us strength to keep on. We pray for the memory of all those taken from us, nearly 3,000 innocent souls. Our hearts still ache for the futures snatched away, the lives that might have been. The parents who would have known the joys of being grandparents, the fathers and mothers who would have known the pride of a child's graduation, the sons and daughters who would have grown, maybe married, and been blessed with children of their own. And those beautiful boys and girls just beginning to find their way who today would have been teenagers and young men and women looking ahead, imagining the mark they'd make on the world. They left this earth. They slipped from our grasp, but it was written, what the heart has once owned and had, it shall never lose. What your family's lost in the temporal, in the here and now, is now eternal. The pride that you carry in your hearts, the love that will never die, your loved one's everlasting place in America's heart. We pray for you, their families who have known the awful depths of loss. And in the quiet moments we've spent together, and from the stories that you've shared, I'm amazed at the will that you've summoned in your lives to lift yourselves up and to carry on and to live and love and laugh again. Even more than memorials of stone and water, your lives are the greatest tribute to those that we lost, for their legacy shines on in you. When you smile just like him, when you toss your hair just like her, when you foster scholarships and service projects that bear the name and of those we lost and make a better world. When you join the firehouse, or you put on the uniform, or you devote yourself to a cause greater than yourself, just like they did, that's a testimony to them. And in your resilience, you've taught us all, there's no trouble we cannot endure, and there's no calamity we cannot overcome. We pray for all those who've stepped forward in those years of war. Diplomats who serve in dangerous posts, as we saw this day last year in Benghazi. Intelligence professionals, often unseen and unheralded, who protect us in every way. Our men and women in uniform who defend this country that we love. Today we remember not only those who died that September day, we pay solemn tribute to more than 6,700 patriots who have given their full measure since, military and civilians. We see their legacy in the friendships they forged, the attacks they prevented, the innocent lives they saved, and in their comrades in Afghanistan who are completing the mission and who by the end of next year will have helped to end this war. So this is the path that we've traveled together. These are the wounds that continue to heal. And this is the faith in God and each other that carries us through, that restores us, and that we summon once more each time we come to hallowed ground, beside this building, or in a Pennsylvania field, or where the towers once stood. Here, in such moments of grace, we are renewed. And it is here that we reaffirm the values and virtues that must guide us. Let us have the strength to face the threats that endure, different though they may be from 12 years ago, so that as long as there are those who would strike our citizens, we will stand vigilant and defend our nation. Let us have the wisdom to know that while force is at times necessary, force alone cannot build the world we seek. So we recommit to the partnerships and progress that builds mutual respect and deepens trust and allows more people to live in dignity, prosperity, and freedom. Let us have the confidence in the values that make us Americans, which we must never lose. The shining liberties that make us a beacon to the world. The rich diversity that makes us stronger. The unity and commitment to one another that we sustain on this National Day of Service and Remembrance. And above all, let us have the courage, like the survivors and families here today, to carry on no matter how dark the night or how difficult the day. You who have made me see many troubles and calamities will revive me again. And from the depths of the earth you will bring me up again. You will increase my greatness and you will comfort me again. May God bless the memory of those that we lost. May He comfort you and your families. And may God bless these United States of America.
President Obama joined by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel at the 9/11 ceremony at the Pentagon earlier today. By the way, if you missed the president at the Pentagon or any of our 9/11 commemorative coverage, it is available online at cspan.org.
President,
The